This is an Urbinary interview. Urbinary. The podcast exploring how we understand and live urban spaces.
Joining us today is Lizzy Privitera, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto. Lizzy holds a degree in architecture from the University of Catania, where she also earned her PhD in community environmental planning. Lizzy is actively involved in the Listening Project, a community-based initiative that collaborates with local partners to envision and work towards equitable transitions. Her research focuses on how the co-production of knowledge can drive environmental and social urban justice. This project serves as a centerpiece of today's interview. In our interview, we touch on topics like emotion, bodily experiences, and subjective observations of space. But we didn't dive into practical methods. With Lizzy, we aim to explore how these approaches can be applied in practice, using her experience in the Listening Project as a guide. Specifically, we also focus on the project's core tools, so working methods and how they enable deeper engagement with urban spaces. Why is observing urban space essential for urban scholars and practitioners? How does this practice contribute to our understanding of cities, and what specific values does it bring to our work?
Thank you for this question. Observing urban space is essential, actually, for urban scholars and practitioners. You're right, and definitely contributes to our understanding of cities. Before to understand why that is important, I would like to trace back some crucial milestones in urban planning theories, just to understand why, actually, observing is becoming more and more important and increasingly important in urban planning. So we have to understand that for many, many centuries, actually, there has been a very mainstream way to approach urban planning. That is what is called usually a positivist and deterministic approach, which means that actually there is a strong belief that we can grasp the reality through a total objectivity. So as a planners, as a researcher, we can understand the realities and the cities as something totally objective by using our rationality. Because of that, also the techniques that have been used in urban planning historically have been based especially in quantify this knowledge, try to find this truth, this objective truth. Okay, is like the mainstream approach. We have to consider that recently, especially in the last century, there was an important turning point, which is what is defined usually a constructivist approach. So according to the constructivism approach, actually the knowledge is not something totally objective, but is actively constructed by individuals. So it's not something that can be reached only through rationality, but also needs to be built according to the experience that humans have and the interaction that humans have with the reality around them. Why constructivism is, let's say, started in pedagogy and educational studies, actually started to influence more and more also the urban planning studies. For instance, there are scholars, great scholars I really like, such as Leonie Sandercock, who really trace back the history of the mainstream urban planning and have emphasized how much actually a constructivist start has been crucial in order to understand that in order to have a knowledge of the city, you need to go beyond just the search for a total objectivity. So it's exactly in this, let's say, switch from more positivistic approach toward a more constructivist approach in the theories and philosophy that also there is a switch in the way urban planners have been trying to understand the cities and try to also understand how to act a plan within the cities. Why these big frameworks? To say that all the research toward a more qualitative approach is exactly can be exactly situated in this switch between these two theories I was mentioning, and I would say that of course a more constructivism approach is much more participant center. So researchers and urban planners try more and more to understand which is the participant perspective and their lived experience. So they started to use and mobilize other tools. That is what we usually call qualitative methodologies. And among the many qualitative methodologies, we have interviews, focus group, and we have also participatory observation. The participatory observation, more in general, the observation of cities, I think take a lot of inspiration from the anthropological and ethnographic studies. So it's really based on the idea that you need to observe and understand what is going on in an environment and try to see how this environment, this urban landscape, these urban environments is used or has been built and constructed. Especially the participatory observation is a specific type of observation. Actually, it's called sometimes participatory observation, but it's really this idea that as a researcher, as an urban planner, if you want to understand a place, you have to be at the same time a participant and observe this place. So you need to have a very immersive experience in a place in order to understand how this place has been built or is used, how people interact to each other, and how people also shape that place through their interaction. Of course, this is connected with other strands of knowledge. In addition to this shift from positivist to constructivist approach I was mentioning at the very beginning, I think we need to mention a couple other strands of knowledge, theories, more recent. I really would like to mention feminist epistemology and studies. I'm thinking here, for instance, at work of Donna Haraway. For instance, she speaks so much about the importance of practice situated knowledge, for which only a partial perspective is a promise of objective vision. And she affirmed, according to her, the only way to find a larger vision is to be somewhere in particular, and objectivity is a situated rationality, according to Donna Haraway. Just to say how also new strand of knowledge, such as these feminist epistemologies, have influenced more and more the idea that we need this situadness. This important to be situated in a place and understand this place through also tools such as observation. And another strand of knowledge that I want to mention in understanding how much observation is crucial, is important, are the relatively recent now, actually, now a couple of decades, but I would say relatively recent studies about the identity of place, the importance of genius loci. I'm, for instance, thinking at the work by Lydia De Candia in Italy, but many other scholars. According to this view, places are considered as highly diversified and continually shifting space with many layers and levels within which there are the different layer of invisible memories, force of and energies, and they are never-ending change. These places are never-ending changing. They always are changing. So in order to that, the more traditional, in order to understand the places that are so much changing over time, so much full of layers of intangible characteristics, traditional and mainstream quantitative tools are not able to grasp such nuance characteristics, and instead other tools need to be mobilized. And then in this sense, immersive work in a place, which means spending a lot of time there, try to understand deeply which are all these layers, is what enable actually to grasp such intangible characteristics of places.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I think that the way you developed this answer really go and help us to go to the second question, because exactly from what you stated, we like to ask you and use this interview with you to understand then what kind of tools and methods we can use to observe urban spaces in order to also grasp the more intangible elements. But apart from like general tools, we'd like to ask you more specific about the listening project you work on. So if you can introduce it to us, and understanding how does this listening session work, and why did you and your team feel it was needed to develop these kind of methods?
Yeah, that's great question. Thank you so much. So let me reflect on that. I would say that we can maybe identify two pieces of answer to this question, which is a great question. A first answer will be about more the tools you're mentioning. So about the tools you're mentioning, I think on a side we have to consider that there are now so many studies about qualitative methods that urban planners and urban studies scholars can mobilize in order to understand and grasp exactly those intangible characteristics we were mentioning before. And I will consider among the different qualitative methods, for sure, the interviews are definitely an important piece. The observation we were mentioning in the previous question, as well as, for instance, focus group and other types of methods. Maybe let's focus on some of those, and then I will answer to the second question. So about these qualitative methods, I would say that the interviews, for instance, and the observation have some elements in common, and both of them needs having a shift in the way scholars and researchers approach the context they are related to. They need to, that the research somehow question who is expert and who is not. Let me explain better what I mean. So when you want to interview someone or you want to observe a context, this means that you're questioning which is your knowledge, and you try to learn from other people. So most probably in doing so, this means that you think that not only your own knowledge, your expert knowledge is the one that is worth to be included, but if you want to learn from other people through interview or by observing what they're doing, this means and implies that you're thinking that also other people are somehow expert. Why I'm mentioning that? Because I think that this implies that there is an epistemological switch in the way we actually think other people can be expert, and you value that knowledge they have. This is very much connected also with some very amazing work by some scholars. I think in this case, for instance, both Carburn and Stengers. Carburn has created the concept of street science, so the science that is actually embedded in the experience of people living in the city. And on the other side, we have Stengers that has wrote an amazing book called Another Science is Possible. And she talked about how, as a researchers, we need to be open and honest, and especially slow down the way we create knowledge. And we need to create a relationship with other people who hold knowledge and try to really understand their point of view. So this implies actually be humble and really, really listening toward other people. And another amazing work about listening, how you can listen, which I think is crucial each time we talk about observation or interviews, is all the work by Marinella Sclavi, who is an Italian amazing scholar who wrote a very famous book, Art of Listening, in Italian L'arte di ascoltare, which for me was a turning point, I have to be honest, in my way to approach urban studies. And in this book, she talked about how we actually have to listen to other people and how to do this actively. And she also mentioned, Marinella Scavi, she also mentioned 3 crucial rules of active listening. And I can mention some of them, but I suggest you to take a look to her work. But for instance, she mentioned the importance of never be in a hurry to reach conclusions, but always take your time to understand things. What you are seeing depends always on your point of view. So in order to see what your point of view is, you have to change it. This means that you have always consider your positionality. You always have to consider, self-reflect that about yourself, your background, what you see in a context or what you see during an interview is very much constrained and dependent on what is your background. So you need to change your point of view if you really want to understand the point of view of other people. And she also say about that in order to understand what another person is saying, you must assume that that person is right. You have to ask this person to help you to understand why it is so. And then another thing, for instance, Mariella Scavi affirm is that the emotions are basic tool of knowledge. If you understand them, then you can understand the language of relationships. So all of this is that to mention. Then there are other amazing rules mentioned by Marinella Sclavi. Just to say, all these I think represent a very important basic. I would say basic previous work that help us to really become a good listener toward other people. You can listen through observation. You can listen through interview. Interviews is one observation we already mentioned. Maybe the interview very quickly. I can mention some, but there is an endless literature about interview. And all of that, but I would say that most of the time they are divided in different typology. The classic division is between structured interview, semi-structured, and free conversation. And usually the interviewers are these in-depth discussion that try to deliver new ways of see and understand a topic. And a specific type of interview is what are defined the lived experience. So our interviews that are based on the lived experience of the people you are interviewing. I had this experience of collecting lived experience of people through interview, and it's a very delicate work because of course people are sharing with you their own experience, their own life, which means also sometimes deliver and share with you hope, vision, but also, for instance, memories, trauma. So we're talking about very personal perspective, very personal data. And so we need to be aware that we're managing very precious material, but at the same time, be always sure that both for privacy reason and all of that, you're deeply respecting what the person is sharing with you. And then a specific type of interview, for instance, I have done in my PhD research is what has been defined as toxic autobiographies, especially Professor Marco Armiero together with other scholars, including me. We wrote an article about this this concept. And then toxic autobiography, for instance, is a specific type of interview that we could say that they are stories of contamination, stories of resistance by all those people who live in marginal, polluted areas and have suffered or are suffering the consequences of environmental contamination. And usually this type of stories are centered on the body, meaning that they generate data that derived from the embodied experience of living in toxic environments. And this type of autobiographies, this type of interview, of course, have the power and the potential to somehow create a counter knowledge and also empower local communities. So just to say how in this specific type of tool is not only an interview, but are interviews that have the potential to create a new storytelling about a place. So there is also this potential, this responsibility. And one of the things that came out during, again, my PhD research, I was working on a specific case study in Gela, which is a petrochemical town. We were using these toxic autobiographies and all of that. By doing so, what came out is that we were collecting all a series of very, I would say, very partial, very situated, very embodied data, which we defined small data, a bit in contraposition with the very famous concept of big data, right? So, and then these small data are exactly these stories that are embodied into the texture of life for humans, but sometimes also no human communities. And really, they have a strong difference with the classic big data, because the small data are really different both epistemologically, also from a methodological perspective, because they are very discrete, very specific, very personal, while, for instance, big data are usually very recurring, very generalized, very impersonal. And at the same time, for instance, big data need technological devices, while small data exactly arise through emotional, sensory experience, immersive fieldwork, direct interaction with between the planner, the researcher, and the context. So just to say how all these qualitative methods really help us to observe and learn much more in depth all the multiple layers. And so you have methods such as observation, as we saw, but also the interviews can have this crucial role or delivering this deep knowledge about places. Of course, I think there is here on an ethical issue that as a researchers and planner, you have to keep in mind, because most of the time this deep knowledge is very sensitive. So you want to be sure to be not extractive toward the place, toward the people. You want to be sure of then reusing this knowledge you have collected in the most ethical way. And as I was mentioning, in addition to this type of tools, since you engage with people, you create a relationship with people, and you need to question your position, be humble, open to listen, open to learn from others, really are based very much more on this immersive field work, and are based very much more on creating a relationship. And it's exactly these characteristics that are the starting point of the project I'm involved in Toronto, here at the University of Toronto, as a postdoctoral researcher. I'm working on and co-leading a project which is called Listening Project, not by chance. And really, the goal of this Listening Project is co-design and facilitate several listening sessions, which are action-oriented conversation that focus on people's connection to place, and also the aspiration of these people for the future. And also we try to connect this aspiration toward the future with potential actionable steps. So what we do in this case is not only doing interview, because it's not exactly an interview, but it's create a space for listening to people but we want to listen with the idea to propose an action. So our action-oriented conversation, or if you want, action-oriented listening. So just to say how also listening can have these action-oriented consequences. It's not just listening because I want to listen to you, but I want to listen with the idea to do something together. So having this also goal of empower and work together with people.
Okay, thanks again. During your answer, you mentioned l'arte di ascoltare about the role of emotions. So
Yes.
I would connect to this with the next question, because also in the description that we found of your project, of the project you're co-leading that you just explained us, that the focus is on people's emotional connection to the place. So we want to understand what then is the role of emotions, of memories, and beliefs, and what roles do they play in the observation of urban space? So how should we, as urban scholars or urban planners, incorporate people's connection to places into our work?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So emotion is crucial for building knowledge, are crucial for understanding places, are crucial also for plan work together with communities. So we definitely have to center more and more our practice around emotions. I will say, on a side, emotion for researchers are really able to tell us a lot, especially each time we are doing research, but we are observing, we are walking through a space, we're doing an interview, we will feel something. We are not robot, right? So what is really a good practice is actually record those emotions, pay attention to those emotions you feel during this, for instance, immersive field work or talking with people. What are you feeling? What that emotion is trying to tell to you? So try to speak with those emotions, and that can be revealing in many ways, because emotions can tell us, for instance, if some answer to a question we asked is like in line with our expectations, or perhaps is not. So, for instance, emotion can reveal if there is a total mismatch between what we are expecting and what we actually are finding on our during our research. Also, emotions tell us a lot about our positionality, how people perceive us, how we perceive the other people or the environments around us. So if we pay attention to that, for instance, we can journaling, we can do journaling emotions, taking notes, all of that. We can definitely incorporate them in order to adjust a bit our positions. I would say our positionalities in the context we are researching. I give you very concrete examples coming from my fieldwork, both during my master thesis and my PhD. In both cases, I carry on a very strict science approach, a very immersive fieldworks. And in both cases, I was I was by then even more a young woman. I was a young woman alone in very in very remote places, or for instance, in neighborhoods that are considered very dangerous. And I was there observing or asking questions, or talking with people, and I was perceiving that my way to be there in that place was not at all neutral. I was not at all neutral as a person there, observing, perhaps coming from a different class, and also being relatively well educated, but at the same time very young, and at the same time alone, and at the same time a woman. There are all a series of characteristics that I was having that were very much impacting the way I was having that interaction and the way I was perceived. So I was feeling all a series of emotions that were very much telling me how much I was perceived as a external from that context. It's something that if I was not paying attention to that, perhaps I would not have understood that type of presence I was having there. And that I think is crucial. Is crucial to incorporate then in the data analysis. Or another time, for instance, I was asking some questions during some of my research, and I received a very, very strong answer that was opposite to my view to see the world, was totally the contrary. And I was very annoyed as emotions. I felt that I was totally annoyed, totally disagree. But so what we do, that emotion tells us a lot about our way to see the world. So what this emotion was trying to tell me is that I was not at all aligned with this person, and there was a clash of value. And that is something we have to acknowledge in the way we try to understand a context. All of these are very important data and information, exactly those small data that are very embedded in the emotions we perceive. So that's from a personal perspective. As a researcher, you perceive those emotions. On the other side, while we are especially meeting other people, having interview with other people, or having these listening sessions I was mentioning before, I'm doing with during my postdoc. So you're also there dealing with emotions that not only your emotions, but emotions are always the fruits of the interaction between several people, between the different actors. So also other people are feeling emotions. And then we want to pay attention to those emotions. For instance, you want to do in a way that you let other people feel as much as possible safe and understood, regardless of their age, race, gender, all of that. So you want to do in a way that your research, for instance, try to reduce any type of harm that is not extractive, that is not creating any damage to anybody. So you want to be careful about what other people are feeling while you create an interaction with them. So there is a reciprocity of the emotion. What I want to say is not only important to analyze and focus on the emotions you're feeling as a researcher, and that's, of course, is crucial for the reasons I said before. But at the same time, especially because emotions are built within this reciprocity and relationships, then you want to be sure you are paying enough attention also to the emotions that the other people who are involved are feeling. I just want to provide an additional, a very practical example coming from an experience I had during my master thesis. I was doing a research in a neighborhood that is considered very neglected, very distressed, a very bad neighborhood back in Catania in Italy, in my city. And in doing that, I was realizing that people across Catania, they were literally avoiding this place. And then I tried to focus and understand why. And in doing that, I did a very experimental exploration, what is called usually psychogeography experimentation. So I was trying to connect the emotions of people while crossing some part of this neighborhood with a map. So I was trying to map their emotion and try to understand the rationality, the reasons underpinning those emotions. So I created all a series of maps together with these people. So I was asking these people that were both from local people, but at the same time also international people, and asking them to record their emotion and to map them physically, to create a map. What came out is that actually there were a combination of emotions, and that people who were having prejudice, they were having unconscious biases about this neighborhood. So local people mainly were having much worse feelings and emotions than international people who didn't know anything about this neighborhood. So it was very important to record and map those emotions to understand how the emotions we feel are very much, in many ways, impacted, influenced by our also unconscious biases, and then we want to be aware of that. And I think the mapping was really a way to create a geography of emotions. So just to say how emotions not only are inside us, but they really have this, I would say, spatial, a geographical dimension.
Thank you very much also for this deepening of your answer. So while I was researching about your the project, the listening project, there is a sort of guide, I don't know how to call it, but where it is explained what is the project. And among the various tools, there is that of walking methods. We decided to ask you more about this because for our episode and for our discussion, we asked some of us to record some videos of their commuting to university as a sort of walking methods. Of course, it doesn't have much scientific basic, no, not basic, scientific I don't know, knowledge, this exercise that we did, but starting from your experience and explaining us what are the walking methods, maybe we can use those videos in a more profound way. So my question is both generally how these walking methods work and how can we use maybe for our exercise.
Yeah, no, walking methods are definitely great, and I think are becoming more and more used and famous, if you want, within urban studies, and then they belong to those more qualitative methodologies, and we were mentioning before, and then I think there are several types of walking methods. I think one nice sentence I really like, and actually I will mention two sentences I really like about walking methodologies, is one by a very famous Italian urban planner who is Bernardo Secchi, who was in some open lecture he had now more than 10 years ago. He was mentioning about the importance of un'urbanistica fatta con I piedi, the importance of having an urban planning that is done with feet. So using our feet, not only from our desk. And nowadays, it seems to me even more relevant with whatever AI, ChatGPT, and Google Maps, and all of that. We really don't need anymore. It seems that we don't need anymore any experiential first-hand experience in order to learn about things. This is what it seems, but it's actually the opposite, right? So Bernardo Secchi really say, no, we need urban planning that is done with feet. We really need cross places. And there is another thing about walking. There is a beautiful book by Francesco Careri, which is called Walkscapes. And in this book, he traced back all the, let's say, we'll say the main characteristics during history of walks through spaces. And he said that walks are a way to explore and know the spaces and stories related to those places. So walking is not only crossing a space, it's not only a physical, knowledge. It's not knowing about the place you are crossing for the physical characteristics you can see firsthand with your own eyes. But walking also allow you to have a more immersive experience, which can be also perceptive, so connected with your perception. Sensorial experience. You can smell a place, right? You can have more this embodied experience of places while crossing. But at the same time, as Careri say, is also a way to learn about stories related to those places. So walking has this multiple added, let's say, I would say walk allow us to have this this multi-layer, deep understanding of places in many ways. There are several specific type of walking. I will mention here a few because they become more and more famous. But I would say a very classic and important type of walks is what is usually defined a community-led walks or citizens-led walk. So usually are walk that are listening and participatory practice that can be carried on either by local organizations, groups, neighbors. This walk usually encourage people to share their stories about their own neighborhood, for instance. By doing so, this walk allow the participant to discover unseen aspects of their communities and also use the walking as a way to connect with other residents. Usually this type of walk also increase collective knowledge because they create a space of exchange of knowledge, and they also enhance the citizens' protagonists in narrating and transforming their place of life. This specific type of walk started with the idea that local people are experts of their streets, that street science I was mentioning before. And then a classic example of citizens-led walk is the so-called Jane's Walk. They are inspired by Jane Jacobs, who, by the way, has a strong connection with Canada too. And then these Jane's Walk are example of these community-led walks with people crossing their own neighborhood and telling stories about their own neighborhood. So that is a type of walks that usually is not only the researcher doing this walk, but actually you do this together with community. It can be really opening your eyes regarding the understanding of a place, of a neighborhood, and so on. In addition to this community-led walks, there are other type of practice. For instance, there are some more public art-based walk. Usually, they intersect the practice of walking with the power of art in order to engage more people around an issue or a topic and so on. They usually include the art language such as piece of art or visual art or music or theater or buskers or sometimes other type of painting, stuff like that. And thanks to this type of art-based work, usually the people can live and perceive a place of their neighborhood, of their city, but in a different way. And this type of work can help to bring attention to some cultural or aesthetic aspects that usually are hidden, but the art allows to unearth, to shed light on these hidden characteristics. And so those are specific type of work that really help to to valorize the emotions connected with those places. Emotion maybe of joy because you are enjoying that place, or perhaps stories and memories, and all those lived experiences we were talking before. In addition to this, I would say that there are other type of very related walk. For instance, I experienced firsthand what are called toxic tours. As I was mentioning before, I've been working a lot on contaminated area. I've been working in Gela for my PhD research. I studied a lot about environmental justice studies. Especially in areas that are contaminated, environmentally degraded, in which the people living there feel powerless, voiceless, then walking became more and more a tool to give voice to people that usually are voiceless, for them to really denounce about the contamination of their places. So usually these toxic tours are these community, quite experimental and experiential led exploration that that really talk about what does it mean to live in toxic places. And usually this toxic tour really emphasize the role of sense and bodies, and can really bodies and sense that are exposed to toxic environment. It really empower local people, build connections and solidarity, and create also a counter narrative about a place, right? So this type of walks, the toxic tour, are a specific type of community-led walks, but they can be very useful also for researchers, for urban planners who want to understand a place. In order to understand that place, through walking together with people who know that place, they really can explore both the sensorial, the embodied experience, as well as the stories related to those places, like Francesco Carreri was mentioning. I can tell a very last things about that. In addition to walk, it's the experience itself of going through with your body, and that is a part of the experience. Well, one thing I tried and I applied during a previous research done was not only walking but also map the walk. So with some people, with some students and so on, we were not only walking, but we together with a community member. So there was a community member, resident, who was bringing us in the neighborhood and show us the neighborhood, this hidden aspect, his memories, their memories, so all of that. But we were also mapping that. So through the walk, you can also create a map of the walk with the stops, the reason why we stopped there, the emotion, what the person shared. And also, this is another way to create alternative geographies, new maps. Someone would say counter maps, but that are based on the walk experience. So you can mix several methodologies. You can mix the walking experience, but also the mapping one.
So during your answer, you mentioned quite some time the fact that we, through these methods, we can have a viability of what you call the small data, but also non-mainstream data. And this is something that we ask ourselves, and this is one of the main reasons why we are bringing this discussion to this podcast, because we want to understand how we can balance qualitative and quantitative data, but also live experience and so emotion, this small data that you were mentioning, so how to have the let's say subjectivity part of urban studies working and talking with the scientific side of urban studies. So we want to understand these from you, and understanding what kind of representations should we aim to provide to bring together these two approaches.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's a great question. It's not an easy answer, but I will say that first of all, more than a duality between big data, small data, between quantitative and qualitative, I would talk more about a complementarity. So these data are very complementary. They complement each other. They complete each other, and they help each other to expand our understanding. And there is a very long strand of knowledge and research talking about the importance of mixed methodologies. Now it's usually a consolidated part of research that you want to integrate both quantitative and qualitative research. And I think that is very true. It's very important. We don't want to discard quantitative research or big data at all. I think they can be very meaningful, very useful. The point is that we don't want to believe that those quantitative and big data are the only true, and they are the objective true. And many times, small data and qualitative methodologies are able to unveil some mistakes interpretative mistakes in the big data in the quantitative methodologies. So the added value of mixed methodologies is really how they can help each other to create a better and in-depth and more complete knowledge of places. So what I would what I've done in my previous experience, as I always look at the quantitative data that have been created about a place, a space, a neighborhood, a population, but then I always try to prove that type of knowledge with immersive field work. And I tried to see which were the mismatch. When I say mismatch, I mean exactly those aspects that are not aligned. So what a big data say, but the small data doesn't. Let's say I give you an example. For instance, working on contaminated spaces, I realized that big data were telling that okay, this area is very contaminated, for instance, so it's very toxic. But then talking with people, some people will say yeah, I eat the tomato from my garden, and then that is a kind of mismatch in the knowledge. This means that there is a lot of contradiction in the way people relate to their own place. And so what I want to say is that you will want always to do a sort of double check. And speaking about how we incorporate them. So for the quantitative part, I think it's very consolidated now with GIS and also other technologies and technique, mapping and creating all a series of tools that are widely used and law recognize those tools. So there is, like, for instance, informative system that now the cities have. They are maps that are mainly always based on quantitative data and tell you about a series of characteristics of the cities. What is actually missing, both in our laws and in our mainstream practice, is really incorporating those small data. And so I think what we need to do is really to try to accompany always, as much as possible, the already available quantitative data and try to see which are the overlaps with small data and qualitative methodologies, so that confirm that knowledge. And especially we want to look at all those time that there is not that overlap, and there is instead a mismatch between the two approach.
Okay, thank you very much. So we go to the final question. And even though you might have been already answering somehow to this final question, we want to use this last question as a sort of backdrop to our episode. So also for you, it might be useful for recap a bit what you have been said. So what we were asking ourselves and what we asked to you is what kind of observation should we aim for in studying urban spaces? Because urban studies situate in the intersection of a technical and humanistic field. And they face, as we mentioned also just now, the challenge of balancing objective inputs such as quantitative information about the environment with subject judgments such as single individuals' perception about the same environment. So the question is, should we strive to set aside our perceptions, or does our perspective inherently shape the way we observe a specific urban space? And also an additional question is, if it does, so if our perspective and other perspective matter in the way we observe urban spaces, what position we as urban scholars should take in the way we then tell the final observation of the space?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. That's important. It's very, very critical, important questions, all of them. I will say that The type of the observation we aim for in studying for urban spaces. I think we have, as I was mentioning, we have a quite consolidated mainstream and more modernist, if you want, traditional way to understand urban spaces through quantitative methodologies, and I think we should keep them as important piece of our history as urban planners, and we need to use all those data that are very crucial and keep those methodologies. At the same time, what is really need to be done is to integrate more and more the qualitative methodologies, and especially we need to try to understand how to incorporate more these small data that provide in-depth understanding of spaces. I think what needs to be done is to reflect more on our C2-edness, mentioning Donna Haraway, our C2-ed knowledge, and self-reflect more on our positionalities, and really try to understand how we build how we build our understanding and knowledge about places, and incorporate these insights in our understanding of places. So all our positionality is really an added value in the way we understand a place. I'll give you an example. As a woman, we are more sensitive to some aspects that perhaps men are less sensitive to. For instance, all the safety issue in public spaces, right? So those are very personal, partial, embodied understanding of space that a more objective understanding perhaps could not intercept. But that's nevertheless is a very added value because help us to understand more how a woman feels more or less safe in public spaces. So this very partial, very embodied perspective of something is actually of a space is actually an added value in understanding in depth a space. So one of the real challenges that I think technology, AI, all of that we struggle to help us to do, and only humans can actually do, is really incorporating, valuing all these more emotional and personal experiential understanding of places. And we need to find tools. I think emotions, memories, all of that, they can be mapped. They can be definitely, most of the time, they have a space-related dimension. So that is something that definitely can be done. So why we don't, for instance, expand our law and try to incorporate more this small data in our mainstream town planning rules? I want to be provocative in that, but why don't do that? Maybe we should question our traditional tools and try to incorporate, especially given the fact that many of these very qualitative data have also this space dimension. So maybe we want to be more provocative, try to question our traditional tools and try to incorporate these more emotional aspects. And I think that is very difficult to objectify what is actually, to make objective what is actually very subjective. So to answer part of your questions, I think the real goal is not try to do in a way that our very subjective understanding of places can be understood as an objective, but is actually value its subjectivity, and see how this value can help our wider understanding of a place. So it's an open challenge, but I think we are on the right on the right direction, and I think many advancements have been already done. If I think of Leona Sandercock work and many other work, so I think is the direction to be taken. If we don't want to delegate our understanding, planning of places only to more quantitative, objective, or objective tools.
Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Polyradio and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano.